Taking the aggression and punk spirit of Motorhead, plus the dynamics and guitar riffs of bands like Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, the next generation of metal was born. The classics kept soldiering on, with the revamped Sabbath now fronted by Ronnie James Dio, and the produced-to-be arena-ready Priest brought a massive second wind to the UK rock world. But for fresh faces, there was the new wave of British heavy metal, or NWOBHM for short, was an explosion of artists that would be the first identifiable scene in metal's history. It wasn't so much a style, despite all taking influence from the bands of the previous decade, but it was definitely a scene, except on a countrywide scale. NWOBHM was a name not established by the bands of the time, because it never is, but through press and radio stations. The term was coined by Jeff Barton of Sounds, seeing several bands in 1979 that we'll be discussing, in the shortly solidifying it as a known quantity. But enough of the Wikipedia nonsense, let's talk about the bands. It's such a massive movement that I'm bound to omit names that you're probably thinking of right now. But I decided to stick to 10 groups that I think best exemplify this scene and are still holding something for newer listeners, curious enough to explore it. The second stipulation is that each pick will be represented via full lengths, which may be a misrepresentation of what this is all about, as such a giant part of it was the singles, which comprise most of this selection's discography, and what most old-timers who were there during its inception would associate it with. Again, this is to introduce the scene to newcomers, younger audiences, and outsiders. Albums are an easier sell than just one-offs. This does mean that Blitzkrieg and Fist won't be mentioned, except now, because I just did it. I could be counting live albums from Holocaust, or even Vardis' debut, 100 Miles Per Hour, which is literally a live album, but moving on! We have to start with Iron Maiden, pretty much the poster child for this whole movement. Not the first, but easily the most successful, and had the longest staying power, as much as they try to undo it. They started with a rough debut that showed great signs of promise. Bassist Steve Harris was already taking his love of early Yes and Wishbone Ash and putting it through a heavy metal filter. But what really sold it was the punky fury that frontman Paul Di'Anno brought to the songs. A large problem the new wave of British heavy metal had was a lot of faceless singers who didn't bring much in terms of distinctive voices, or even when they did, the characteristics meant a ceiling was placed on how far they'd go. Looking at you, Raven. Di'Anno didn't have this problem. Going on to do Top of the Pops, and in uncharacteristic fashion, performing their song Running Free as opposed to simply miming to it. In 1981, they brought in the incredible talents of producer Martin Birch for their sophomore release, Killers, which is my personal favourite Maiden album. However, with tensions rising between the rest of the band and Paul, he eventually got the boot, while Samson singer Bruce Dickinson left his band to become Iron Maiden's new vocalist for Number of the Beast, an immortal album in heavy metal history, despite, upon reflection, containing a couple of duds like Invaders and Gangland. What sells the album is the colossal tracks that form the backbone of Maiden's sets to this day. 22 Acacia Avenue, the title track, Children of the Damned, the inspired choice for a single that even casual rock fans know in Run to the Hills, and possibly the finest closer the band has ever done in Hallowed Be Thy Name. Everyone needs to hear these songs if you wish to dive into the world of metal. I might not suggest it as the first album you go to. Quite frankly, I find that they only refine the formula for the rest of their decade, so Peace of Mind or Power Slave would be my go-tos, but nothing will top the cultural significance this one album had. Now on to the others. Angel Witch. This band were dealt with a poor deck of cards. While Iron Maiden had an excellent promoter and a label that knew what to do with them, Angel Witch were relegated to one album and a number of singles before they put out material again, which was long after their heyday. It's a cautionary tale of how a band manager can be vital to your success, and Angel Witch needed a Ron Smallwood, like Iron Maiden had, in order to capitalize upon the material they had and build some proper momentum. It's a great shame, as the self-titled Angel Witch album is possibly the finest piece of new wave of British heavy metal condensed into an all-killer, no-filler atmospheric experience that runs the gamut of fast yet melodic cuts like the opening 1-2 punch of the title track in Atlantis, the proto-doom of Free Man and Sorcerers, or the stomping menace of Angel of Death. Thankfully, Angel Witch have reconvened in recent years, and in an ironic twist where they debatably started out more fully formed than Maiden and were quickly overtaken by them, the new material sounds more vital and full of energy than anything Iron Maiden have done since 2000's Brave New World. Kevin Hayborn's guitar soloing, riffs, and vocals are all still stellar, and he's been the one riding the ship for all these years. However, a common theme with the majority of bands discussed so far could be boiled down to missed opportunities. Diamond Head, another casualty of poor decision making. A debut that came out of the gate swinging, stuffed with classics like Helpless, Sucking My Love, It's Electric, and Am I Evil. They were a pivotal part in Metallica and Megadeth's development and sound. Lightning to the Nations was another smash in the scene that left fans eager to check out more material by them, only to have a sophomore that lacked the raw excitement of the debut, with re-recordings of some of the same songs, plus a more sluggish pace, the only redeeming factor being the classic Rodney Matthews artwork, which you'll find on a number of albums from this era. Canterbury continued this downward trajectory, despite me personally liking it more, quite frankly, and a series of unknown quantities were sporadically released, further cementing them as an also-ran. Thankfully, they've been on an upward swing with the last couple of albums. Seriously, check out The Coffin Train. It never quite captures the excitement that early material had, of course, and they simply don't have the discography to give them enough momentum, but sole original member Brian Tatler has done well for himself. Metallica have covered lots of his songs, and now he's joined fellow new wave of British heavy metal peers, Saxon. This one is a tragic case. As Saxon predated the debut game of Iron Maiden by a whole year, were in the early days of the movement, genre leaders. They made several appearances on Top of the Pops, had great album sales, and opened for Motorhead on the Bomber Tour. Biff Byford had a distinctive voice, Paul Quinn and Graham Oliver were a competent guitar duo cut from the Judas Priest lineage, and their rough and ready punk speeds and anthemic anthems gave them a ton of steam, like a Princess of the Night. They didn't have the great production of Martin Birch or Mutt Lange, or the powerhouse vocals of Bruce Dickinson, or the foresight to progress in a more technical or metallic direction and favor a glam direction fitting of supermodels in glossy makeup and not some guys you'd meet down the pub, and you can see what went wrong here. While they kicked off the 80s like they had something to prove, the rest of the decade was comprised of poor quality albums that led them to being perceived as a laughingstock, and groups like Iron Maiden and Def Leppard quickly eclipsed them as they went on to conquer the world and left Saxon firmly in the underground. Not necessarily a bad thing, as the mid-90s onwards they've been remarkably reliable, releasing decent to great records that not only reach the heights of the classics, not only in pure heaviness, but they've got some great production behind them, but also in the quality of the songs themselves. Some are definitely better than others, but they're still killing it live and are as dependable as you could expect from a band that's been around for as long as they have. Biff sounds great on these new albums too. With age, it's improved his vocals and given him more of a commanding presence that sells the material more so than it did in the beginning. Def Leppard. This band single-handedly invented glam metal. You can't convince me otherwise. They adapted to the American market in a way that contemporaries simply couldn't. Now, despite releasing 2 solid gold classic albums from this era, they always dismissed the metal tag and didn't want to be associated with it. Which is why I'm going to move on from them. Bye, Joe. Instead, let's discuss the Tigers of Pan Tang. They're another key Nawabum band that had a more hard rock approach and had several key releases early on, but unlike Def Leppard, really cut their legacy short once they tried to Americanize their sound. Seriously, those albums sucked. But Spellbound and Crazy Nights both feature the iconic Rodney Matthews artwork, the great vocals of John Deverell, and again, the dual guitars of a longtime Axeman Rob Wire and John Sykes, who would later go on to play on Thin Lizzy's final album, Thunder and Lightning, and Whitesnake's smash hard rock hit 1987, so good on him. Great anthems on these two, like Gangland, The Story So Far, Silver and Gold, Running Out of Time, and Love Don't Stay. And since the 2010s, the material has made a marked improvement, with 4 solid as a rock releases that, thanks to modern production, have a way beefier sound than before. Now, each of the bands discussed so far pushed for tighter playing and better quality productions than what came previously. Whether or not they succeeded is beside the point. That's not true about our next artist. Venom! Intentionally recording rough on purpose and sloppy playing is synonymous with Venom. Fans of early punk could get behind this group in particular. Sons of Satan, Witching Hour, In League with Satan, Welcome to Hell, taking the satanic imagery to the fullest. Mantis, Kronos, and Abaddon. Just to be clear, yes, those are stage names. Venom were the most blasphemous of the Nawabum bands, so much so that they had the honours of being name-dropped by the PMRC's Filthy 15. What a way to boost your popularity and longevity by being described as an enemy of the government, quite frankly, due to your lyrical content. These guys are a significant influence on the development of extreme metal. Every thrash and black metal band under the sun has cited them, and their whole stage presence with the chains and stage pyrotechnics while running around on stage made them a must-see live experience. On record, however, is where Venom made their mark, with their first two being genre classics, Welcome to Hell and Black Metal. They've never been able to match their first several releases, but they've had a couple of decent latter career drops in Primeval and From the Very Depths. Again, inconsistency on style and constant lineup changes have kneecapped their growth, and they could have had way more, with Kronos being the sole original member and Venom Inc. being led by guitarist Mantis. Speaking of mantises, a common trait of the new wave of British heavy metal was the album art. It was the first time in metal's history that bands were unapologetic of the music contained within by coupling it with an awesome illustration on the cover. Two bands you could say falsely advertised the actual material would be Demon and Praying Mantis. Again, look at that incredible Rodney Matthews piece. And then you're greeted with melodic rock, AOR, and very little in common with the aforementioned bands. Despite all of this, Time Tells No Lies is a real solid album full of great hooks and memorable guitar work. Children of Earth and Running for Tomorrow in particular are highlights worth checking out if you're interested. The Troy brothers have been keeping the band going through the years despite constant lineup changes, featuring several ex-Iron Maideners in Paul Di'Anno, Dennis Stratton and Clive Burr coming in and out of their ranks. While not a success story in the West, they've gone remarkably well in Japan and have built a solid discography that doesn't have significant dips like all the previous bands mentioned. Highlights can be found throughout their discography like Forever in Time, Legacy and Gravity, still genuinely bringing excellent songwriting and again, brilliant Rodney Matthews album art. Now we come to the Motorhead section, as they had an undeniable footprint on this whole movement as we've discussed. First up we have Tank, fronted by Algie Ward, formerly a member of The Damned on their Machine Gun Etiquette album, on bass and vocals. Filth, Hounds of Hades was produced by Fast Eddie Clarke, obviously of Motorhead, and they open up for them on their Iron Fist tour. The debut is stuffed with killer riffs and powerhouse performances, everything from Blood, Guts and Beer to Turn Your Head Around to the title track. The third album, This Means War, brought on the two-guitar attack of Mick Tucker and Peter Brabs, and is the other significant release in the Tank story worth listening to. Of course, the ever-present bug of band friction eventually caused Algie Ward to split with Tank and lead two different groups under the same name, Algie Ward's Tank and the actual Tank with Mick Tucker and Cliff Evans, keeping the original band going despite no original members in it. Despite this, the Tucker-Evans Tank is significantly better, and sadly Algie passed away back in May of 2023, but left behind a legacy that'll give him staying power for many years to come. The other Motorhead alumni would be Girlschool, the all-female group who's probably most notable for their collaboration with Motorhead on the St. Valentine's Day Massacre EP, covering the classic track Please Don't Touch as Head Girl, and covering each other's songs, Girlschool doing the Motorhead classic Bomber, and Motorhead covering the Girlschool Barnstormer Emergency off their debut album Demolition, which is raw and again full of memorable traditional metal classics. They follow it up with two more great albums in Hit and Run, my personal favourite, and Screaming Blue Murder before inevitably falling under the identity crisis many of their ilk suffered in the mid-80s. Again, they've redeemed themselves with some solid work later on down the road, like the self-titled album in the 90s and Legacy. Weird how there's two different albums that both have the same name from this lineup. Finally, as a purely selfish choice, we'll be covering Satan. Their debut, Caught in the Act, arrived at the tail end of the new wave of British heavy metal movement in 1983, and they sadly never achieved anything substantial beyond it. Not as large as the others due to timing alone, this album packs a punch. Technical guitar riffing, twin leads and anthemic choruses, this has everything you could want in a trad metal record. Brian Ross jumping from Blitzkrieg to Satan and cementing a lineup that's remained way more consistent than even the biggest names that spawned around this time. They have been the greatest out of these groups when it comes to releasing new albums, with 6 since reforming compared to the 2 they put out during their so-called heyday, the second one weirdly featuring a guy called Michael Jackson on vocals. But sadly, when Satan, Grim Reaper, Tokyo Blade, and Savage finally dropped their essentials, the so-called New Wave's glory days were already behind it, and all the bands that would have been big were big. Now you might be asking, why did the door shut so violently for this movement that was so vibrant and had so many promising names in the scene? Well, part of this was the zeitgeist began to swing stateside, with all the glam and hair metal like Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Rat and Dokken taking over. But the real killer of the new wave of British heavy movement was a little thing called thrash.